Alright, so it's been a while, and we've missed quite a bit when it comes to the MCU, so this video is gonna be a super review. Alright, so let's start with Loki Season 2, and when it comes to this season, I didn't really like it up until the end. I feel like this season just didn't get good until the last 2 episodes. But before we get to that, let's start from the beginning. And the beginning of the season is actually just a direct continuation of the first, with Loki entering a past version of the TVA that he hadn't been to originally, so none of the people there recognize him. And this concept they introduced called time slipping directly plays into that in a really cool way, with Loki slipping into different time periods to help the situation that he was originally in. And right away, you can see the chemistry between Loki and Mobius shine once again, something that I said was a bright spot of Season 1. Tom and Owen's performances as these characters are really good, and they bounce off each other in a way that feels so real and fun. Ke Huy Quan makes his MCU debut as Ouroboros and is absolutely great in this role. I'm honestly so glad he's finding regular work again after going so long between his appearances in Indiana Jones and Everything Everywhere, where he was struggling to find acting gigs. But anyways, this episode introduces the main conflict that we'll be dealing with throughout the rest of the season, and while it makes sense that this would be the thing that this season revolves around, it's also not that engaging or interesting. So much of this season is built around one simple, singular objective, which is fixing the loom. Like I said, after the ending of the last season with the infinitely branching timelines, it makes sense that the thing we'd be dealing with in this season would be the direct consequence of that, which comes in the form of the loom and the fact that it's now being overloaded with the infinitely branching timelines. But as I said previously, the whole season revolving around such a simple concept like fixing a machine is not that interesting, at least to me. But Ouroboros says that the loom can't be fixed without the aura of He Who Remains, and so Loki and Mobius track down a variant of his named Victor Timely, who we saw in the post-credits of Ant-Man 3, and this was a lot more interesting to me at the time that I watched it, but knowing what we know now, just 3 months later, it's kind of hard to care about anything that's shown here now. But Loki and Mobius bring Timely back to the TVA, Sylvie joins them after being dissuaded from killing Timely the way she did He Who Remains, and Victor Timely is brought to the loom only to be violently ripped apart by the radiation before he can fix it. And I loved this part. I loved that the whole episode kept building up to this moment where they could finally access the loom, and it seemed like Timely was going to fix it, and then it just abruptly cuts off all the music and Timely is disintegrated. I love moments like this across all media where it just seems like the worst possible thing that could have happened happens and the audience is just left thinking, well, what now? And this is where the season, and in my opinion, the entire show and character development of Loki reached its peak, because after the loom blows up, Loki travels to all these different timelines where he finds all his TVA friends who've returned to their past lives before they were sent to the TVA, and they don't recognize Loki anymore, and he gathers all of them so that their collective aura can be used to go back in time to the moment before the loom fails. And Loki's character development really hits a turning point when he tries to get Sylvie on board, and Sylvie refuses to help and forces Loki to admit that the reason why he's doing this is because he doesn't want to lose the friends that he's made and that he's scared of being alone. But Loki eventually figures out how to control his time slipping after seeing all his friends spaghettify, which I feel like was a bit rushed because he hadn't been focusing on that as much as he had been just trying to find all his friends. So him just figuring it out on the spot made it feel like things were just happening too quickly. But once Loki figures out his time slipping, he goes back to the moment before the loom fails. We get a fun little trial and error montage, and eventually we get to a point where Timely fixes the loom, and they find out that it still doesn't work. And that leads to the ending of this season, this show, and this character of Loki, where the comics version of the character is fully realized, and Loki becomes the god of stories, replacing He Who Remains at the end of the timeline, overseeing all the timelines and stories. And that is one hell of an ending to the MCU Loki character. It's much better than the original ending of him learning to love his brother and then just getting his neck broken by Thanos. In this ending, his greatest fear of being all alone comes true as he has to be the sole bearer of that responsibility of overseeing the timelines, but also he reluctantly accepts the role, knowing that it keeps his friends safe. And for a guy who at the beginning of this universe was solely focused on ascending to his throne, seeing him get there and bear the weight of that responsibility for the right reason reasons and not do it simply because he wants to take over the world and have everyone bow to him like he did in the first Avengers is a great arc for Loki. The fact that this is where we're more than likely going to leave the character as the ruler of Yggdrasil, the tree that holds all the 9 realms, as was referenced in the very first Thor back in 2011, is just perfect. So even if I found the first half a bit boring, I have to say that conceptually, this season had some really cool things to work with, and that ending is just perfect. So I'm wrapping it up and giving Loki Season 2 a 7 out of 10. So now we're on Ms. Marvel, and I originally watched the first half of this show when it first came out, but then I got a bit bored and just never got around to finishing it. But honestly, that was during a time when we were kind of on a string of average Marvel TV shows like Hawkeye and Moon Knight. So by the time we got to this show, I was already kind of checked out, and I just lost interest and never finished it. But with the Marvels coming out, it felt like it was as good a time as any to watch Ms. Marvel all the way through this time, and it was fine. I remember during my first viewing, I was actually liking the first bit of this series. It was actually cute seeing Marvel take things back down to earth, not just in the literal sense, but in the figurative sense, with a story that didn't focus on wild stuff like time travel or multi-dimensional travel, and just focus on a down-to-earth, simple story of Kamala learning to be a superhero while balancing all the difficulties and problems of a regular teenage life. It's basically Spider-Man, but with brown people. Wait, now hold on, that might not actually be. Other than the fact that this is a really down-to-earth story though, I also really liked how this show looked stylistically. It's actually pretty unique and creative in how it uses things like animation to illustrate Kamala's fantasies and how it writes out text messages using the stars in Kamala's room or a crosswalk or the neon lights in a building. The production design really sets this show apart from other MCU projects in a lot of ways. This is definitely one of those superhero projects that feels more comic booky, kind of like a Spider-Verse or a Suicide Squad. No, not that one. Jesus Christ, not that one. And I really liked Kamala's character in this show, which is kind of weird because she kind of annoyed me the first time I watched this show. I don't know, maybe some people like this overexcited, energetic, cringe, hyped fangirl character, but I usually don't. It usually annoys me after a while. Kind of like how Tom Holland's Peter Parker really annoyed me in the Spider-Man movies. And maybe that's it, is that it just reminds me of Tom Holland's Iron Man fanboy cringe ass, but for whatever reason, this time, I was alright with it. It might be because this time I watched Ms. Marvel after I saw The Marvels, where Kamala was probably the best part of that movie and gave that movie the most life, and that's why I liked her more this time around watching her show, because I already had that positive perception of her beforehand, but I'll get into all that later. But for now, let's talk about the plot, because in the beginning, we have this cute plot of Kamala trying to sneak out of her room to go to Comic-Con, and everything about this whole first half is really simple, down-to-earth, and effective. It's fun to watch simple, relatable storylines like a kid going against their overbearing parents' wishes and trying to sneak out of the house, or seeing a kid get friend-zoned by their crush while their crush pursues the popular, dreamy guy, or seeing a wedding celebration. All these things are very relatable things that help the audience connect with the characters and the show. And what makes this especially relatable is the South Asian cultural influence that permeates throughout the show. This is easily one of the best aspects of the show that very much gives it its own unique identity and style. We haven't really seen a South Asian Muslim story represented on screen yet in Marvel, and the fact that this show does that sets it apart from the other MCU projects. And for a guy that has constantly complained about the MCU being so samey, I was all for something different. However, all my praise so far has mainly been aimed at the first half of the series, because by the time we get to the second half of the show, my interest took a serious downturn. Specifically when they left New Jersey and went to Karachi. Like I've been saying, for the most part, the story in New Jersey so far had been cute and relatable, but when we get to Karachi, while the change in scenery is refreshing, the story starts focusing more on the supernatural, like the Noor and the clandestines. And I gotta talk about the clandestines for a second, because I think the clandestines might be some of the worst villains I've seen in the MCU in a long time. Not the worst though, that'll come in a second. But the clandestines at the end of the day are really just a bunch of impatient refugees. Their actions are solely motivated by the fact that they don't want to wait around any longer to get back home, and that is just not very compelling. We also don't know why they were exiled in the first place. To my knowledge, they never gave any background information as to why they were forced out of the Nor. We just know that they were exiled and they want to get back. But like I was saying, this is where the supernatural elements of the story start to take center stage, and they are just not as interesting as what was happening in the first half of the story. The whole second half of the story, with Kamala's bangle creating a portal back to the Nor and also providing the flashbacks of what happened in Karachi leading up to and during that fateful night that the last train was departing, was just so out there and just such a tonal shift from cute, fun to let's look at this piece of serious, dark history that I just did not like it. I did like, however, the twist of Kamala being the person who guided her grandmother to her father so they could make the train that night. It's very Harry Potter-esque, very Prisoner of Azkaban-esque. I liked it. And by the time we get to the end, we're back in New Jersey, and it kind of felt like they rushed the ending, because at this point the clandestines have been handled, and the only thing left really is the government that's trying to bring in these superpowered beings like Kamala and Kamran. So really they have to figure out how to get the government to leave these two alone, and the solution is to just send Kamran away from the US government's jurisdiction and get the government attacking Kamala to go viral. So it makes the government look really bad and they'll stop. And both of those endings are kind of dumb because they could have just had Kamran leave much sooner. Like, if you were just going to deport him in the end, why did you wait this long to send him away? Look at all the damage this is causing. You could have prevented all this. Also, the government only stopping because they were caught in 4K attacking a child doesn't really seem to hold up, because I'm fairly certain there have been plenty of times in the MCU where the government has attacked a kid. You're telling me at none of these instances was anything released to the public or leaked? Nobody in the public knew some of this stuff was going on? I don't know, that doesn't seem right to me. But anyways, other than the second half of the show with the boring background info on Karachi and Kamala's family and the ending feeling rushed, I did like the overall presentation of the show and the cute grounded stuff that was in the show. So in the end, I'm going to give Miss Marvel a 6.5 out of 10. Alright, now we're going to move on to the Marvels, which I know no one saw, and don't lie to me because I've run the numbers, but I kind of had a special circumstance where I was reconnecting with an old friend of mine and we used to do movie nights together, and the first movie we went to see together was Captain Marvel back in 2019. So when we reunited, it was only appropriate that we saw the sequel. That's not a good reason. I don't know. I saw it. Whatever. And the thing is, I kind of liked it. Unfortunately, I kind of knew going into it that it didn't matter even if it was good, because nobody was going to see this movie. I think we all knew this movie was going to bomb. Did I think it was going to be the lowest grossing MCU project in history? I don't know if I thought it was going to be that bad, but I knew it was going to be bad, which again is a shame because this movie isn't even that bad. I remember talking to my friend as we walked out of the theater and saying how we liked it better than the first one, because we both hated that first one. That first Captain Marvel movie is so bland, just no life in it whatsoever. Carol Danvers had like no personality, but this movie definitely felt like it picked up where a lot of that first movie was lacking. There's just so much more life and identity and flavor injected into this movie. And going back to what I was saying before when I talked about Miss Marvel, a lot of that has to do with Iman Vellani's performance as Kamala Khan. I personally think she saves this movie. She is easily the best part of this film. She has so much charisma and charm and is so cute that it just offsets what I said before about any lack of personality. Kamala is pretty much the reason for a lot of the life of this movie existing. There are also some creative, colorful scenes, like when they reach this one planet where the entire gimmick is that everything has to be sung. And this is the fun stuff that the first Captain Marvel movie just didn't have. Also, the fact that this movie is the shortest movie in the MCU is such a blessing, because for a movie like this, it absolutely has to be short and sweet. I also like the gimmick this movie had throughout of our three heroes switching places every time they used their powers. It's sort of a good way to force the concept of teamwork on these three. However, I mentioned it earlier, but the villain in this movie was just not working for me. She's probably like the most forgettable villain in the MCU. I don't even remember her name. And I just watched this movie. I do remember that the villain was mad that her world was left in an awful state because of Captain Marvel's actions, and that's why the main conflict and plot of this movie exists. But after the villain is defeated, the ending of this movie is really the only thing that has any real significance, because Kamala tells Carol that she's forming the Young Avengers and starts by recruiting Kate Bishop from the Hawkeye Disney Plus show, and Rambeau gets stuck in another dimension, which introduces the X-Men, starting with Beast, who, I don't know if that's Nicholas Hoult or not from the 20th Century Fox X-Men series, but those two post-credit scenes are basically the biggest things that happen in this movie. I don't know what else to say about this movie, to be honest. There wasn't really anything super noteworthy that stood out or was really remarkable. It's basically just a more colorful, fun version of the first movie, whose ending will help introduce more superpower teams in the MCU going forward, so I'll take it. It wasn't so incredibly boring like the first one was, so I'll give it a 6 out of 10. So at this point, the only thing I really have left to watch and haven't reviewed yet is Echo, which just came out, so maybe I'll get into that later. I kind of wanted to make a big MCU video since we'll be taking a break from the MCU for a while with only one movie coming out this year. Thank God, with the MCU's first R-rated superhero film, Deadpool 3. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how Disney does violence and gore and debauchery. I'm really hoping they don't find a way to mess this up, because Deadpool is one of those guys that's just so easy to get right. I'm really hoping with only one movie coming out this year, it means we're going back to the old ways during the Infinity Saga, where we're not super oversaturated with superhero content and they could focus on quality over quantity. But yeah, I think that's just about it. I'm basically all caught up now with the exception of Echo and I think What If, which I already said I'm not going to watch or review because I'm not a fan of animated shows that truthfully at the end of the day have no real consequence on the universe of the MCU because they're just hypothetical anthology stories. So yeah, just Echo really is left, which I'll do soon enough. I want to do a video on the new Percy Jackson series that's just come out, since the first video of mine was my reviewing the 2 Percy Jackson movies that came out in the early 2010s. I also want to talk about Kung Fu Panda in a video soon, since the 4th one is coming out and I have a real connection with that franchise and have some thoughts about where it's headed. Then there's other stuff like the new live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender series that I think would make a great video because I'm a huge fan of the original cartoon. And yeah, I know what I just said about me not being a fan of animated stuff, but Avatar is the exception. And in that same vein, I think I might also do a reaction and review of the new Spider-Verse movie. And since the new Dune movie is coming out, maybe I'll even talk about those 2 movies. So yeah, I'm gonna see what I can do with all that stuff. But for now, I think I'm just about done with Marvel for at least a couple of months. I think, right? Am I missing something? What's that? One last thing? Oh, no. 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 2 out of 10, fell asleep 3 times trying to finish it and gave up.